The sound of splintering wood echoed across the frozen harbor as Prince Magnus Eriksson plunged through the ice. His golden hair disappeared beneath the black water, while his warriors stood frozen in horror. From the slave quarters, Sera watched her world shatter. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden. Slaves who drew attention died slowly and painfully in Jorvik. But when Magnus's desperate hand broke the surface one final time, something deeper than fear took hold. Without thought, she sprinted across the dock, bare feet slipping on ice, and dove into the killing cold. The water hit like 1,000 knives. Her lungs seized, muscles locked in protest. But she fought toward the sinking prince, defying not just death's pull, but every law that had kept her chained since birth. Their eyes met underwater, his wide with shock, hers burning with determination. In that moment, slave and prince became simply two souls fighting death together. Sera pressed against the cold stone wall of the slave quarters, watching through a crack as Viking warriors prepared their longships for winter storage. Her breath fogged in the bitter air as she studied their movements, memorizing patterns that might one day save her life. Born in this settlement to a Saxon slave who died birthing her, Sera had known 18 winters of servitude. She scrubbed floors, tended fires, and perfected the art of invisibility that kept slaves alive under Viking rule. But unlike the others, Sera carried secrets. Her mother had taught her letters before dying, and the old cook had whispered stories of distant lands where people chose their own fates. Sera. Astrid's harsh voice cut through her thoughts. The house mistress stood in the doorway, weathered face stern with authority. Stop daydreaming. The prince returns tonight. Prince Magnus Eriksson. Even his name sent whispers through the settlement, like wind through wheat. At 25, the Jarl's son had already led 3 successful raids, bringing wealth and glory to their people. Tall, strong, feared in battle. Everything a Viking prince should be. He was also the only Viking who had ever looked at her as if she were human. Last summer she'd been scrubbing the great hall when he entered, exhausted from training. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Instead of the usual dismissal or hunger she saw in Viking eyes, she found something else. Curiosity. Perhaps kindness. The moment passed quickly, but that brief connection had haunted her since. The prince brings Danish nobles, Astrid continued. Important guests who could become powerful allies. Everything must be perfect, or you'll feel the lash. Sera nodded silently and hurried to the kitchens where other slaves prepared the feast. Roasted meats, fresh bread, imported wine worth more than their lives. As evening painted the sky crimson, the great hall filled with firelight and celebration. Hidden in shadows, Sera served the feast, trying to remain invisible among the boisterous Vikings. Prince Magnus sat at the high table, golden hair catching firelight like spun metal. His deep blue tunic bore silver embroidery, and arm rings proclaimed his victories. Yet despite the luxury surrounding him, Sera noticed something in his eyes, a loneliness that all the wealth in the world couldn't fill. The Danish guests proved crude men who drank heavily and spoke louder with each cup. Their leader, Jarl Sven, was massive with cruel eyes and hands that grabbed at every slave girl who passed. "Your father grows old, Magnus," Sven said, his voice carrying across the hall like a challenge. "Perhaps younger blood should lead. I have 3 ships, 100 warriors. Together we could take whatever we wanted." Magnus's jaw tightened visibly. "My father rules here. I serve his will." "How noble." Sven's laugh held no warmth, but nobility doesn't fill treasure chests. The Saxon kingdoms weaken daily. Irish monasteries overflow with gold. Why waste time with honor when power waits for the taking? Sera saw the prince's hands clench around his drinking horn, duty warring with ambition, honor fighting opportunity. The night grew wilder as Danes became more drunk and aggressive. Sera tried staying hidden, but as she refilled cups, Jarl's friend's massive hand shot out, gripping her wrist with crushing force. "What have we here?" His breath reeked of ale and decay. "A pretty slave. Come sit with me, girl." Terror froze her blood. She tried pulling away, but his grip was iron. Around the hall, Vikings laughed or ignored her plight, the strong taking from the weak, as the world had always worked. "Please, my lord," she whispered. "I must serve the other guests." "You'll serve me first." His other hand reached for her dress ties. "Release her." The command cut through noise like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward Prince Magnus, who had risen from his seat, hand resting on his sword hilt, blue eyes burning with cold fire. Sven laughed. "Just a slave boy. Surely you're not attached to this one." I said, "Release her." The hall fell silent enough to hear breathing. A prince defending a slave violated every law and custom. Sera's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Seven's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you challenging me over property? I'm telling you to release what belongs to this house." The words carried deeper meaning, protection, perhaps even care. After a long moment where violence hung thick as smoke, Sven released her with disgust. "Keep your pet then. But remember, weakness is a luxury kings cannot afford." Sera stumbled back into shadows, wrist aching from Sven's grip, but her heart ached worse. The prince had protected her at terrible cost. She'd seen the looks exchanged between Danish guests, doubt planted about Magnus's fitness to rule. Later, as she cleaned the emptied hall, she found Prince Magnus standing alone by the great hearth. Firelight danced across his strong features, highlighting the burden he carried. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, not turning. "No, my lord. Thank you. You don't need to thank me." His voice sounded tired, older than his years. "What's your name?" "Sera, my lord." "Sera," he repeated it softly, testing the sound. "It means bright star in the old tongue. Your mother chose well." Surprise flickered through her. Most Vikings cared nothing for slave names or their meanings. "You have intelligent eyes," he continued. "Brave ones. Not many would dare meet my gaze, as you did last summer." Heat flooded her cheeks. He remembered. "My lord, I shouldn't." "No, you shouldn't." He finally turned, and the weight in his eyes made her breath catch. "But then, I shouldn't have defended you tonight. We both seem prone to doing things we shouldn't." Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. For a heartbeat stretching toward eternity, the gulf between slave and prince disappeared entirely. Then reality crashed back. Sera dropped her gaze, curtsying deeply. "Forgive me, my lord. I know my place. Do you?" His voice held strange gentleness. "Sometimes I wonder if any of us truly know our place in this world." He left her standing alone by dying embers, her heart pounding with dangerous hope. 3 mornings later, Prince Magnus stood on the harbour wall watching his breath mist in cold air. Jarl Svander's words haunted him. Weakness is a luxury kings cannot afford. His father was indeed aging. Grey had conquered Eric's hair completely. His hands sometimes trembled, and long counsels exhausted him. Other Jarls had noticed. Whispers spoke of coming challenges, tests determining who would rule when Eric could no longer lift his sword. Magnus knew he should be planning, building alliances, gathering warriors, proving strength through conquest. Instead, he thought of a slave girl with brave eyes and an unbreakable spirit. "You look troubled, my son." Magnus turned to find his father approaching, wrapped in thick fur against morning's bite, even stooped with age. Erik Eriksson commanded respect through presence alone. The Danes made interesting offers, Magnus said carefully. Savan is ambitious, useful if controlled, dangerous if not. Erik joined him at the wall. What did you think of his proposals? Rich rewards but greater risks. The Saxon kingdoms maintain strong armies. The Irish High King has Scottish alliances. Conquest wouldn't come easily. Erik nodded, approvingly. Wisdom. But young warriors grow restless during long winters, dreaming of gold and glory. Unsatisfied dreams become dangerous. Then we plan smaller raids come spring. Coastal settlements with weaker defenses. Build gradually rather than risk everything. Good. Erik's sharp eyes missed nothing, despite his years. But something else troubles you. Something beyond war plans. Magnus felt heat rise in his cheeks. His father had always read him too easily. I saw the feast, Erik continued quietly, with the slave girl. Magnus's heart sank. Father, you showed honor. Good. But also interest. Dangerous. They stood in silence, watching mist rise from harbor waters like ghosts. Tell me about her, Erik said finally. The question surprised Magnus. She's different, intelligent, educated somehow. Her mother must have taught her letters. Beautiful. Magnus couldn't deny it. Yes. Erik sighed deeply. Beauty and intelligence in a slave, dangerous for any man, especially a prince who must marry for alliance. I know my duty, Magnus said stiffly. Do you? The Danish princess arrives in 3 days. Sprum's daughter, your future bride if we're to seal this alliance. The words hit, like physical blows. Magnus had known this day would come, but wasn't prepared for how much reality would hurt. When he managed. The marriage feast before winter solstice. It shows strength to enemies, binds Sven's warriors to our cause. Magnus gripped stone until his knuckles whitened. If I refuse, then Sven finds another ally. Young Olaf from northern settlements has ships, men, and has made his own offers to our rivals. Erik's voice grew grave. We need this alliance. Our enemies strengthen while we debate. The choice is simple. Marry the girl, secure our future, or watch everything crumble. Simple for you. Erik's hand fell heavily on his shoulder. You think it was simple for me? I loved your mother desperately, but married for alliance. Love came later, growing from respect and shared purpose. Perhaps the same awaits you. And the slave remains a slave. Unless, Erik paused thoughtfully. Unless what? There's an old custom. If a slave saves their master's life, they can be granted freedom. Perhaps elevated to free status if the service proves great enough. Magnus frowned. But she's done nothing to. Yet, Erik's weathered face held secrets. Opportunities have ways of presenting themselves to those who watch. With those cryptic words, the old Jarl departed, leaving Magnus alone with his thoughts and growing certainty his father was planning something. In the slave quarters, Sera faced her own crisis. News of the prince's engagement had spread like wildfire. Other slaves whispered with mixed excitement and fear. A Danish princess, said old Greta, who'd served 30 years, beautiful with golden hair and a dowry of silver and warriors. The prince will be happy, young Helga added, still dreaming of romance despite slavery. What man wouldn't want such a bride? Sila remained silent, but her heart felt crushed in a giant's fist. She had no right to this pain. The prince stood far above her station. She'd always known their connection was hopeless. But knowing and accepting were different creatures entirely. That evening, serving in the great hall, she noticed Prince Magnus barely touched his food. He sat stiffly at the high table, offering short, distracted responses. His eyes never once sought the shadows where she worked. After the meal, cleaning tables, she found a small parchment scroll tucked under his drinking cup. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The harbor. Midnight. Come alone. Though unsigned, she recognized his handwriting from documents she'd glimpsed. Every instinct screamed to burn the message and forget it existed. Meeting the prince secretly went beyond dangerous discovery, meant slow, painful death for her, ruined reputation for him. But as midnight approached, she crept through darkened streets. The night was clear and bitter, stars scattered across black silk sky like diamonds. She found him at the longest dock's end, cloak wrapped tight against wind. For a moment she almost fled. This was madness. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said without turning. "I shouldn't have." "No, you shouldn't." He faced her then, starlight revealing torment in his eyes. "But I'm glad you did." They stood apart, both knowing they dared not move closer. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the Danish princess?" "Yes, the marriage happens in 3 days." Simple words shattered something inside her. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Sera," he said her name like a prayer. "If things were different, but they're not." She forced strength into her voice. "You're a prince, I'm a slave. No path exists between our worlds. Doesn't there?" He stepped closer, and she could smell wool, leather, pine soap. "My father spoke of old customs. Freedom earned through great service. What service could I possibly provide? I don't know, but perhaps fate will provide opportunity." His hand reached toward her face, almost touching before falling away. The space between them burned with unspoken longing. "I should go," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. But neither moved. A night bird called across water, breaking the spell. Sera fled into darkness, leaving Prince Magnus alone with impossible dreams. Princess Astrid Svensdottir arrived like winter storm, beautiful, powerful, and cold. Tall and graceful, with silver-gold hair braided with gems, she moved through the great hall as if already its queen. Her silk dress bore the deep blue only royalty afforded. Her jewelry proclaimed wealth enough to buy armies. From shadows, Sera watched Prince Magnus greet his bride with formal courtesy. Astrid smiled and laughed perfectly, but her eyes constantly evaluated, measuring the hall's wealth, warriors' strength, servants' deference. This woman understood power and intended to wield it. The engagement ceremony that evening forced Sera to serve, while watching Magnus and Astrid exchange rings and ritual words binding their futures. When the princess kissed her betrothed, Sera felt her own heart being torn away. But worse followed. "You," Princess Astrid's voice cut through celebration. She pointed directly at Sera. "The dark-haired slave, come here." Every eye turned. Sera's legs felt like water as she approached and curtsied deeply. "Your name?" Astrid asked, voice honeyed but blade sharp. "Sera, Your Highness." Such an unusual name for a slave. Almost too pretty, don't you think? Astrid's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I've heard interesting stories. They say you can read and write, unusual skills for your station." "My mother taught me, Your Highness." "How fortunate. And they say you've caught certain household members' attention." The hall fell silent. Everyone understood the implication. Sera's heart pounded thunderously. "I serve faithfully, Your Highness. Nothing more." "Of course." Astrid's smile sharpened. "But faithful service takes many forms. Perhaps you could demonstrate your literacy, I have documents needing copying, boring but suitable for your particular skills. A trap, but Sera had no choice. I would be honored to serve. Excellent. Begin tomorrow. Astrid turned away with casual cruelty. But Sera glimpsed Prince Magnus's face, jaw clenched, eyes burning with suppressed fury. He knew exactly what his bride intended, but stood powerless to intervene. The next morning, reporting to Astrid's chambers, Sera found the Danish princess already redecorating to suit her tastes. "Our learned slave," Astrid said without looking up. "How punctual. I appreciate punctuality." The princess's scribe handed Sera parchments and quill. "Copy exactly. Every word, every mark." Sera began working but soon realized these weren't ordinary documents. They were letters between Astrid and her father discussing post-marriage plans. The old Jarl weakens daily. Once we begin undermining his authority. Magnus is strong but young, easily guided if handled properly. Several younger warriors already hunger for greater raids. Well-placed words could turn them. The settlement's defenses are adequate, but not impregnable. If internal pressure fails, 3 ships arriving unexpectedly could take the harbor during feast. Horror grew as Sera read. This wasn't just political marriage, it was conquest's first step. Astrid and Seven intended taking control by force if necessary, and Magnus knew nothing. Something wrong? Princess Astrid had moved silently behind her. "You seem distracted." "No, Your Highness. Just concentrating on accuracy." "Good. Accuracy is important with sensitive information." The threat was clear. A faithful slave knows discretion's value. Loose tongues have ways of being cut out. "I understand perfectly, Your Highness." Sera spent the morning copying treasonous letters, each word burning into memory. By dismissal, she knew every detail of the Danish conquest plan. But what could she do? A slave's word meant nothing against a princess. Even if Magnus believed her, confronting his bride based on slave testimony would destroy the alliance, potentially start war. That evening, serving in the Great Hall, she watched Prince Magnus carefully. He performed happiness well, but she saw tension in his shoulders, smiles that never reached his eyes. When he stepped outside for air, she made her decision. The harbor was deserted except for watchmen, but Sera knew hidden paths between warehouses. She waited in shadows until Magnus passed, then stepped into his path. "My lord." He spun, hand going to sword before recognizing her. "Sera, if someone sees, your life is in danger." The words stopped his protests cold. "What?" Quickly, quietly, she revealed everything from the copied letters. His face darkened with each revelation. "You're certain?" he asked when she finished. "I copied every word. They plan to strike during your wedding feast when everyone's drunk. 3 ships will enter, while Danish warriors inside create chaos." Magnus ran hands through his hair, mind racing. Father needs to know. Will he believe a slave over his ally's daughter? Or think you're avoiding unwanted marriage? Doubt flickered in his eyes. "What do you suggest?" "We need proof beyond my word. Princess Astrid keeps originals locked in her chambers. If we could retrieve them..." "That's impossible. The risk..." "I can do it. I know her routines. She takes sleeping draught nightly. Wine with poppy extract. While she sleeps, I could search." Magnus stared in amazement. "You'd risk your life? For you?" "Yes." The words escaped before she could stop them. Something shifted in Magnus's expression. Without thought, he cupped her face in his hands. "Sera, I know it's impossible." He kissed her then, gentle and desperate and heartbreaking. For one perfect moment, the world vanished. No prince, no slave, no impossible barriers. Just two souls finding each other against all odds. When they broke apart, both trembled. "I love you," he said, words torn from deep within. "God help me, I love you." "And I love you," she replied, through tears, "which is why I must do this." 2 nights later, Sera crept toward Astrid's chambers. Her heart hammered as she listened at the door, deep, regular breathing of drugged sleep. The stolen key turned slowly, every sound making her wince. Astrid lay motionless on silk pillows, looking calculating even in sleep. The locked chest sat in the corner, dark oak bound with iron. The key hung on a chain at Astrid's throat, beneath her nightgown. Getting it meant touching the sleeping woman, risking waking her. Moving with infinite care, Sera approached. Astrid's breathing remained steady. The draft worked well. Sera slid fingers beneath silk and grasped the key. Astrid stirred, mumbling in Danish. Sera froze, barely breathing. Then the princess settled back into deep sleep. The chest opened with a soft click. Inside, beneath silk and jewels, lay the letter bundle tied with ribbon. Sera's hands trembled as she confirmed these were the originals. Looking for something? Blood turned to ice. Behind her, Astrid sat up, not drugged but sharp and alert, eyes glittering with malicious triumph. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Astrid rose gracefully. "I've been watching, waiting to see what you'd do." Sera clutched the letters. "These prove your treachery. They prove nothing to people who won't live to read them." A knife glinted in Astrid's hand. "You've been useful, actually. Now I have proof that slaves here cannot be trusted. Complete cleansing will be necessary. Magnus will never believe you, won't he? A jealous slave, mad with envy, attempting theft. The evidence will be convincing when they find your body." Sera backed toward the window. People will ask questions about a clumsy slave falling while cleaning. Such accidents happen constantly. Astrid's smile was pure poison. "Though I should thank you first." "For what?" "Making this easier. Did you think I'd actually marry that crippled excuse for a prince?" The words hit like blows. "What? The engagement's real, but marriage? To a man who barely walks, let alone leads warriors?" Astrid laughed coldly. "We have grander plans. Once Magnus dies tragically defending against raiders, I'll marry his cousin Olaf. The power transition will be seamless. The raiders, you're not conquering, you're destroying." "Very good." "Yes, father's ships arrive as raiders, not allies. They'll attack during the wedding feast. Most current leadership dies in the surprise, leaving a vacuum for suitable candidates. Innocent people, necessary casualties. You can't build new order without clearing old." Astrid raised the knife. "Speaking of which," Sera didn't wait. She threw herself through the wooden shutters, clutching letters as she fell. The drop was farther than expected. She hit hard, pain shooting through shoulder and ribs. But adrenaline drove her up and running as shouts erupted above. Guards appeared from shadows, cutting off escape routes. They herded her toward the harbor like hunters driving prey. At water's edge, she found herself trapped. "End of the line, slave," the guard captain called. "Hand over what you stole." Sera looked at the letters, the only proof of conspiracy. If taken, Magnus would die never knowing truth. Making a decision that would change everything, she threw the letters far into harbor waters. "No!" Astrid's scream echoed across the settlement. "Take her alive," the princess ordered, arriving with more guards. "She'll suffer for this." But a new voice cut through darkness. "Stand down. Prince Magnus emerged from shadows with his personal warriors, sword drawn, face terrible with controlled fury. Magnus. Astrid immediately switched to innocence. Thank gods you're here. This slave attacked me, tried stealing. Enough. I know what she found. I know everything. Astrid's mask slipped momentarily. You have no proof. Don't I? Magnus nodded toward the harbor where torches now illuminated 3 Danish longships hidden in morning mist. My scouts have watched your father's ship since yesterday. They've seen the warriors, weapons, attack preparation. Astrid went white. You can't prove I was involved. Your correspondence has been enlightening. A bluff, but effective. Without original letters, Magnus had no proof. But Astrid didn't know that. You're making a terrible mistake, she hissed. My father has 100 warriors. Against 3 ships? Perhaps not. Magnus smiled grimly. That father has his own allies. Look behind you. Astrid spun to see torches blazing around the harbor. What seemed like surprise attack was revealed as trap. Eric's warriors had waited in concealment, ready to spring ambush. Did you think, Eric's voice came from darkness, that Eric the Farseer's son would be so easily deceived? We've known your treachery for days. The old Jarl emerged, armed despite his age. Behind him came dozens of warriors, surrounding Astrid and her guards. Impossible. How? Eric's eyes found Sera at water's edge. A faithful servant risked everything for truth, though the proof she provided went to dramatic lengths for recovery. A small boat appeared with the settlement's best diver holding a waterproof satchel. The letters, he called, wrapped in oiled cloth, weighted with stones as suspected, all recovered, still readable. Sera stared amazed. You knew I'd throw them? I hoped you'd be clever enough to preserve evidence while appearing to destroy it, Magnus replied, though my heart stopped when you jumped from that window. You planned everything? From the moment you warned me, Father and I have been setting this trap, waiting for them to move. Eric addressed the captured princess. Lady Astrid, you're guilty of conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason against hospitality laws. The penalty is death. You cannot execute me. I'm a princess. There will be war. There would have been war regardless. At least now we face it on our terms. As Astrid was led to imprisonment, Magnus turned to Sera. In torchlight, his eyes held warmth and something deeper. You saved us all. At risk of your life, you saved everyone. I couldn't let them hurt you. Eric approached, weathered face thoughtful. Old laws speak of freedom for slaves who save their master's life. But this goes far beyond. You saved not just my son, but our entire people. Father, such service deserves more than freedom. It deserves recognition. Eric's voice carried across the harbor. Sera, daughter of no-name slaves, I declare you free with all rights that entails. More, your courage and wisdom prove you worthy of highest honor. I name you Sera, Eric's daughter, adopted daughter of my house with dowry rights and noble status. The crowd erupted in cheers. Warriors raised weapons in salute. Even former slaves wept with joy. But Sera only saw Magnus, looking at her with wonder and love that poets immortalize. Is this real? She whispered. As real as your courage. As real as the love that drove you to save us. But happiness proved short-lived. War horns boomed across water. Jarl Sven had seen his trap reversed and wasn't retreating quietly. They're attacking anyway, Magnus said grimly as Danish ships moved to assault formation. Eric nodded. Sven's too proud for defeat. He'll try taking by force what he couldn't take by stealth. The harbor erupted as warriors ran to positions. Sera found herself swept in chaos, no longer slave, but uncertain of her role as newly declared noble. Sera Magnus caught her arm. "Get to safety with the other women." "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I've spent my life watching others fight. Not anymore. I know this settlement better than anyone. Every path, weakness, landing spot. You need that knowledge." He wanted to argue, but saw determination in her face. This wasn't the frightened slave who'd served in silence. "Stay close. If I say run, you run." The first Danish ship struck like a battering ram. Warriors poured over sides with battle cries echoing off water. Eric's forces held prepared positions, but the trap had sprung early. "The North Dock," Sera called over clashing weapons. "They're trying to land another group away from main fighting." Magnus saw shadows moving in pre-dawn darkness, Danes seeking undefended landing. "Olsen, 20 men to North Dock. Stop that landing." Even as one threat was contained, another emerged. Fire arrows fell from Danish ships, aimed at wooden buildings. If structures caught, the battle would become desperate struggle to save lives, rather than defeat enemies. "The well chains," Sera said urgently. "If we organize slaves and servants into bucket brigades, do it. You know them best." Sera ran through the settlement, calling to people she'd worked beside for years. Her new status meant nothing now. What mattered was trust, knowing she'd never ask what she wouldn't do herself. Within minutes, organized lines passed water buckets, dousing flames before they spread. The battle raged on. Danes had established foothold on main dock, pushing inland with desperate fury. "Magnus," Eric's voice carried over din. "The hall. They're flanking through the great hall." Sera's blood froze. Non-combatants sheltered there. "If Danes broke through, go," she urged Magnus, who was torn between duties. He kissed her quickly, desperately, then ran with his best warriors. Sera continued directing firefighting, but part of her attention tracked the battle's flow. Then she saw something that froze her blood. Danish warriors breaking from main battle toward back settlement, toward slave quarters and granaries. If they burned food stores, the settlement would face starvation even in victory. "Keep water moving," she called, then ran toward threatened buildings. She reached granaries as 6 Danish raiders arrived with torches and axes, intent on destruction. "Looking for something?" she called, stepping into their path. The scarred leader grinned nastily. "A pretty Saxon come to play." Not Saxon, and not playing. She led them where she wanted, toward the building she knew best, with loose floorboards concealing old escape tunnels. "Doesn't matter what you are," the raider said, raising his torch. "You'll burn pretty." But as he moved to set fire, Sera vanished through what looked like solid floor into tunnels beneath. She'd prepared for this, tunnels stocked with oil-soaked rags and kindling. Lighting them from below created illusion of burning granary while protecting it. Confused Danes found themselves surrounded by smoke with no clear target. In panic, they struck at shadows, hitting each other more than enemies. From hidden position, Sera used building knowledge to strike and disappear repeatedly. She wasn't strong enough for direct combat, but didn't need to be, just confuse and delay until help arrived. Help came as Magnus, with reinforcements. The granaries? Safe. 6 raiders in smoke, blind and panicked. The skirmish was brief, but larger battle wasn't going well. More Danish ships had appeared. Sven had brought every warrior he could muster. "We're outnumbered 3-1, Magnus said grimly. Father's plan assumed 3 ships, not this fleet. "Then we need new plans." Sera was covered in soot, clothes torn, but eyes burned with determination. and I have one. Dangerous, requiring trust. Tell me, the harbor mouth looks wide, but there's a reason fishing boats enter only from east. Sera explained as they crouched behind cover. Not rocks, ice shelves from the storm, wedged between underwater pillars. From surface water looks clear. But below, the Danes don't know. Their ships sit right over the worst. How does that help? We can't lower ships onto ice. Sera's smile turned dangerous. No, but we can raise ice to them. The harbor chains support ropes. If cut underwater at the right moment, the chain falls, strikes ice shelves. Impact should dislodge them, send them up into Danish hulls. Magnus stared. You want to swim under harbor? In winter, under enemy ships, to cut probably frozen chain supports. I'm the best swimmer here, and small enough to move between pillars unseen. It's suicide. It's hope. Magnus, without something soon, they'll overrun us through numbers. Your father's wounded. Half our warriors down. This might be our only chance. He looked toward harbor, where Danish reinforcements kept arriving. She was right. I'll do it, he said. No, you're needed here, and your leg. The water's too cold, currents too strong. It must be me. He wanted to argue, but knew she was right. His injury, manageable on land, would be fatal liability in freezing water. How long? If everything goes perfectly, quarter hour to reach chains, cut them, return. She didn't mention everything that could go wrong. And if you don't return? She touched his face gently. Then remember, I chose this. For the first time I got to choose. Their kiss tasted of smoke and desperation and transcendent love. Then Sera moved through shadows toward water's edge, discarding noble clothes for a simple shift, waterproof pouch with sharp knives over her shoulder. The water drove breath from her lungs with cold beyond description. For a moment, muscles seized and she thought she'd drown before beginning. But training took over. Years swimming all weather had prepared her body. She forced slow breathing, purposeful movement. Underwater was alien and terrifying. Sound muffled, direction confusing. The harbor chain stretched into murky depths like a sea serpent. Following required swimming deeper than ever before. Pressure built in ears and chest. Lungs burned for air. There, support pillars, thick posts, driven deep, massive ropes wrapped around them holding defensive chain. First rope was arm-thick and frozen stiff. Her knife seemed pitiful against it, but she sawed desperately. Above, dark silhouettes of Danish ships cut water like whale bellies. If spotted, the rope parted with a snap, sending vibrations through water. One down, 3 remaining. Lungs screamed for air. But surfacing exposed her to Danish archers.